I think the way to go for this whole thing, and by the way, you guys are welcome to chime in, but I want this to be snark-free. I want this to be informative, a journey through Game Freak. I assume there's Pokemon fans that care about this kind of thing. This episode's all about deep dives.
Jeez.
Well, take me outside the building.
It's called the Carrot Tower.
Which it was named by children, apparently. There was a contest to name the building, and they called it the Carrot Tower.
I tried making a Kakarot Tower joke, and no one
I got it.
All right,
it's also carrot in English, which is weird. It's not.
It is odd.
Yeah.
But the strangest part, no Pokestop for Pokemon Go.
Nope.
Is it orange?
It's orangish.
It's orange.
Okay, well, that makes sense.
Yeah, but no, there's no reference to Game Freak in the lobby, really. And like I said, I think there were 3 Pokestops in Pokemon Go, and none of them called out Game Freak in any way. Like, they just want to quietly sit there and make Pokemon, and not be bothered.
That's smart. That's very smart, by the way.
So we were led upstairs. We saw a fantastic little lobby area, which is where we did a lot of the video interviews, which are going to be going up on the site. One of them's already out there. And then the most exciting... Oh, go for it.
Tell me about the lobby.
Well, there are a bunch of Pokemon toys.
Yeah,
well, just stuff.
I mean, you can't just call it fantastic and then walk by.
It wasn't really. This was actually a meeting room to the side. It's like their museum when they have like little figures of. They said they think that it's every Pokemon. They weren't sure because there's more than 800 at this point. But Junichi Masuda, producer, director, composer for Pokemon, co-founder of Game Freak, he was really like unsure. He's like, yeah, I think we have every Pokemon in here.
Did you guys take one?
I don't want to get into it. But
anyway, so then we're led into the actual development studio, which was the most exciting part. And their lobby has a huge rotating globe. They say to remind themselves that, hey, we're making Pokemon for a global audience.
We're on Earth.
It's a dark room. There's it's really dark. The Game Freak logo is lit up. The globe is lit up. And then off to the side, there's one chair. And I think there's a phone, right?
It's a red phone, the emergency phone.
And there's lighting on the floor, so it's kind of ominous.
It is ominous. Weird. And then it gets more confusing because as you go on then, it's a shoes-off office, which is different. I've been in a handful of Japanese studios. I've never seen this. And they say, interestingly, that it's a reference or at least an homage, or I don't know what you'd call it exactly, but to the fact that the Pokemon series and Game Freak started in general, with people kind of homebrewing, crafting, developing games in their basement, and it was a relaxed environment. And so they want to carry that forward, even though it's a 100-person team at this point, by, hey, shoes off, put on these sandals, let's all have a good time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like Shenmue. Going at home in Shenmue. You always take off your shoes.
I mean, it is like Japanese culture, but he specifically called it out as being it seemed like it wasn't necessarily a typical thing to have to take off your shoes to enter the studio.
Absolutely. So then we walk in the studio. What was your first impression, Kyle?
It was more interesting than I thought it would be in the sense that there was more toys and more Pokemon stuff. There were plushes on everyone's desk. I really, I was expecting a very sterile office because every image I've seen of a Japanese developer, you guys, I know Dan, you guys saw From Software and
it was very vanilla.
From Software had a couple of knickknacks. I mean, pretty sterile, but there were a few things.
But that's what I expected, and there was more fun stuff going on than I expected. I didn't see any big statues or anything, but it seems like everyone had Pokemon plushes on their desk and lots of toys.
I saw Undertale toys. It had a lot more personality. Yeah, they had a shelf with a bunch of games that people could check out and stuff.
Yeah, it was kind of like a library, and then the middle area where they eat lunch and stuff like that. They had lots of toys and board games and things like that for people to just play with.
So I got to know, in a shoes-off environment, do you up your sock game?
Everyone had wild socks.
Yeah, I mean, was that the case? I would think you'd want to just be wearing white with the red stripe on.
That's the kind of detail you should have taken into account, Kyle, when you're writing this feature. What Masuda's socks looked like.
I did notice that some people did have socks and they weren't wearing the slippers. Those seemed like the troublemakers of the studio.
Wild man. But let's actually get into interesting stuff, right? So it's about a 100-person team, and it was hey, this half of the studio, because it's kind of shaped like a big horseshoe. And the middle part is the lunch area and stuff. And they're like, hey, this half of the team, so roughly 50 people, this is where Ultra Sun and Moon is being developed. And so that's where we spent most of our time. We were not allowed to go to the other area. So Game Freak, they always have their side projects, whether it's Tempo the Badass Elephant or Harmonite or Giga Wrecker, which we talked about on the podcast a while back. Yeah. And so who knows if that second half of the studio was all outside projects other than Pokemon, or if that was largely the Switch game.
Oh, I hope so.
I hope so too.
Game. Yeah.
I mean, there were Switches on the desk in the Ultra Sun and Moon area, but again, unclear. It's is that a dev unit, or is that just so that people can play Breath of the Wild during lunch? But still exciting to see a Switch in the Game Freak office. That's enough to get me excited.
Yeah. There was also, I guess, in that initial meeting room, they literally had every console, which kind of shouldn't be too surprising, but kind of surprised me. Like any console that you can think of, they just had a huge pile of them in the corner of their meeting room, which was kind of cool.
You just wanted pure Nintendo stuff?
I don't know. I didn't expect to see a lot of like PlayStations and Xboxes and stuff, but they're always open to developing for the consoles. Like they've never been shy about that.
It was definitely one of the biggest takeaways from the trip. Is it was really exciting to see just how much, I don't know if exciting is the right word, but how much daylight there is between Game Freak and Nintendo. Like it came up several times throughout the interviews of like, oh, Nintendo, they're just a friend, they're a partner, but really like we're clearly a very hungry and to see themselves as a very independent studio. Even when talking about like the different features throughout the years, making different Pokemon games, it was fun how Masuda would occasionally bring up, like for example, Diamond and Pearl, the first DS Pokemon game. I guess Nintendo was telling them like, hey, everybody's going to be using the stylus on their DS. They have to design it for the stylus. And then Masuda was like, I don't think people are going to use that stylus. People are going to use their fingers. So we need to make it look like tactile and like huge buttons for battling and stuff on the bottom screen. Yeah. And Nintendo's like, no, they're really going to use the stylus. Like, I don't think so. And it turns out they were right.
Yeah, it's like after the games came out, I went and saw people playing it outside using their finger. Like no one's using their stylus, you know. And it was interesting to hear him be like, I mean, it's not butting heads with Nintendo, but you'd think if like, you know, Nintendo is not even necessarily your boss, which is something we got into is like, how does this structure work? If Nintendo is telling you to do something and they're willing to be like, nah, we're going to do it our own way. Thanks for your input, but we're going to do it this way.
Even to the point of Nintendo pushing 3D so much, and then with Pokemon X and Y, only the battles were available in actual stereoscopic 3D. Yeah. It's like, we just don't think people are going to use 3D that much.
And we asked him about that, and he was just kind of like, yeah, we talked to Nintendo, and, you know, they understood after we talked to them for a while. You know?
One thing I noticed, like, after reading your article, Kyle, but seeing it in the videos is a lot of the rooms you went into were very different. Like the meeting rooms are all kind of defined by a theme, right? Can you kind of go into...
We can talk about that. Like there's 4 meeting rooms. One we've already described, which is kind of the museum. Hanson, you'll have to help me with the names.
Love it.
They were named after planets, right?
Specifically, Holst, Symphony of the Planets. Like that was the whole idea. So we have like Jupiter, Saturn, Gaia, and Venus.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Yeah, okay. So, and Gaia was a room that was like had a big window facing out. They're pretty high up.
Beautiful view,
and tons of plants in there, and a huge fish tank too.
And the idea was that the fish die and teach everybody empathy was pointed out. Also, the idea of the plants.
Yeah, they did.
They did totally say that. Yeah. And then with plants, like, I know it takes a long time to raise these plants. We want them to be real plants. We want the developers to take care of them. It's like managing a Pokemon series for the long term. It's like game development. You know, you need to nurture these things.
Yeah, they want them to take care of the fish too, and not just kill them.
What the hell? What are you talking about with the fish? They wanted to see the fish die?
No, they're supposed to take care of them, but if they die,
it teaches them empathy. Is what they pointed out.
Because they take care of all that. They take care of the plants. They take care of the fish. The staff does. They don't hire people to come in and take care of the tank or anything like that, is what he told us.
Absolutely. The most exciting meeting room. There are other meeting rooms and stuff. There's one called Venus. The Venus room. We have video of it. It's hot pink.
Yeah.
It's very cool.
Seems like a teenage girl's bedroom or something. There's like a chandelier and like a desk mirror.
It's like a Barbie playhouse. Yeah. And they were big on like, this was designed by the women on this. This was designed by the women. Like, hey, it's cool, man. It's cool. Like there's like stuffed animals everywhere.
It's a very comfortable room.
It's an amazing little bizarre
just
meeting
next
room.
To the kitchen. It's like, oh, here's a bright pink room you can have a meeting in if you want.
Yeah.
And then the last room was probably the least exciting. It was just like it was heavily mirrored. Like there were mirrors all over the wall, and the mirrors were all kind of angled to point to a big TV in the middle of the room. And the idea behind that room was like, this is where we go if we want to show off something on video, because like your attention, because of the mirrors, is drawn to the screen in the middle of the room.
Yeah, absolutely. What were your big takeaways from the overall visit, spending this much time with Game Freak?
That's like a big question.
I know.
They were open, like more open to our questions than I thought they would be. I kind of like, same with the office being, I assumed it would be very sterile.
Yeah.
I thought they would be very closed off and like, just because of our experience with Japanese developers in general, like I thought I would be like, so, you know, development of Ruby and Sapphire, tell me about that. And they would be like, well, you know, that was a tough one, but, you know, we stuck it out and we got the game out and it was very successful. It sold 1 million+ copies. But to hear him go into stories that were like, oh God, that game almost killed me. Everyone said Pokemon was going to die. I had to go to the hospital. And like, and he's like, and then when the game finally came out, I had a nightmare the night before that it was a failure. And then I went into the stores the next day and there were lines and could not be more relieved. And it was cool to hear stories like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like I did not expect him to tell me about the time he had a nightmare the night before Ruby and Sapphire came out.
Yeah. And as far as like concrete details in Ultra Sun or the Switch game, I mean, obviously they were very guarded about those types of things, but they were more game, especially it's always amazing in video. Just like, hey, we're gonna barge into your studio. Hope you're cool on video. And they were really nice. We have a video that just went up with them talking about like the pressure behind making the Switch game.
Yeah.
I dug through a bunch of old forum posts and presented them to those guys, and they were incredibly cool reading off those forum posts and reacting to those.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. And then one of the coolest videos we have coming up later is we asked like, hey, do they have any old dev documents from the original games, anything along those lines? And we showed up, and it's a table filled with like every piece of like
notebooks,
paperwork,
concept art, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, and so there's a video. It's raw, it's weird, but it's them just like leafing through all these old pages and offering some incredible insight into the development of the original games, and then almost every Pokemon game from then.
It was funny because with like red and green and blue and gold and silver, he was very much like, I wish we had more stuff for these games, but we were really just like improvising during development that whole time. Like we didn't take a lot of notes. Like now we have a process that we go through, and we're very, it takes about 3 years now. We have it down, but he's like, but for red and blue, I mean, we were just all that stuff's gone because it was all just we're making it up as
they're faxing it around, or even they said like there's not really too much great old concept art because they would just design the Pokemon within the Game Boy hardware. And so we asked, because it was an interesting thread that popped up on Reddit a while ago talking about like the evolution of Pokemon eyes. And this is geeky, but we're here to get geeky, right?
Yeah.
Originally, they were much more kind of Toriyama, angular, pointed eyes, and now they're all round and cutesy. Mm-hmm. And so we asked about that basic idea, and he's like, well, you couldn't do circles with the pixel limitation on the Game Boy, so we had to make them angular.
Yeah,
and there was no concept art; it was just
they were
really
just drawing them into the game with the pixels. So
that's why Machop looks like such a disaster.
Going back to some of those sprites is pretty rough.
Thank you so much for watching this excerpt from the Game Informer Show podcast. You can subscribe to the audio version and listen to new episodes airing every Thursday. We cover big games on the horizon, games that we've just reviewed. We have long-form developer interviews, a lot of fun stuff. So check it out every Thursday.